All right, guys, I want to have a little bit of fun as we get going. You guys cool with that? Yeah, all right. So I've got this theory about crowds and people that I believe, go with me, anyone at any place at any time can start a chant. You heard me, and I might be unleashing a can of worms at this week of Move, but I believe that anyone can start a chant, all right? So I just want to practice a little bit. You guys with me on that? Okay, all right, so let's just start small, all right? I'm going to say some things, and you guys just chant with me, all right? C-I-Y. 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 All right, amazing. You guys did amazing. So you can start a chant anywhere. And I don't know what kind of person you are in your friend group, but I am the idiot who usually will do dares just for the sake of like fun and laughter and memories. Sometimes I get hurt, you know, whatevs. The thing is, though, it hasn't really stopped in adulthood. As it turns out, in adulthood, I still love a good, weird dare. And there's a few memories at the very top of the list for me of times that a friend has dared me to do something. And at the very top is a time that I was at a football game with my husband and two of our closest friends. We were at a Michigan versus Northwestern game. I'll show you guys a picture to prove you guys there. Okay, so here's the deal. I already know some of you guys are like gonna tell me that you don't like Michigan. What you need to know is I do not care. So just, my husband would, but Ann Wilson doesn't, but I am every fan's worst nightmare because I am bandwagon girl, you know? So like I love Kyle, he loves Michigan, I love Michigan, right? Okay, so we're at this Michigan Northwestern game, and what you need to know is that this wasn't a big like rivalry of a game. Like usually people knew how this game was gonna go down. And even though I was a football cheerleader in high school, what you also need to know is that as it turns out, you do need to know how to flip and not drop people, but you don't need to know a lot about football to be a football cheerleader. So I went in with very little knowledge of like, I just go to the games, some of you guys are with me, you go to the games for the marching band, for the food, for the festivities, right? I am that person. I love it all. The merriment, amazing. So we're there, and I'm like, you know what? I'm getting a little bored. I'm gonna start some chants. Because in a crowd, you can start a chant at any time. And so my friend Nate, he is, you know, he's rowdy like me, and so I'm like, Nate, you tell me what to say, because I don't know what's going on, and I will start that chant. And he's like, deal, great. So we start off small. You know, I'm like getting the people around me going, and most people around us are Michigan fans, except a few. So I'm like, you know, Michigan, Michigan. And then everyone around us is like, you know, Michigan, Michigan. It doesn't take much. And so then, I'm like, all right. So then we do another softball of defense, defense, defense. That's right. Yep, that's right. And other people around us are like, yeah, you know. They're thinking I'm just like the biggest Michigan fan of all time. And so then I'm like, okay. And I say to Nate, give me some weird stuff to say, and I'm gonna see if it works out. Just anything weird. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, deal. So he's like, you should chant, it's time to pay the price. Now, what you need to know is that there was no price to be paid at this game, okay? Especially as a Michigan person, like Michigan was winning by a ton. They had won in like past history. Like it was kind of offensive, honestly, for a Michigan person to be screaming, it's time to pay the price. Like it probably looked like someone needed to come like pick me up and take me somewhere, you know, not at that game. But I'm like, here we go. And so I just start screaming, it's time to pay the price. And people around me are like, and a few confused that are like, it's time to pay the price, you know? And Nate's going along. He's a little embarrassed, but we're going for it. So I just want to see if you guys will do it with me, all right? It's time to pay the price. It's time to pay the price. All right, amazing. Yes, you got it. You can start a chant anywhere, now you know. But the thing is that we are an easily influenced people. And even for those of you who just sat with your arms folded and you're like, I've never chanted a day in my life, you also are easily influenced, maybe in not the chanty ways, but in other ways too. See, what I think a lot of us miss is that we are being discipled all the time. When I say discipled, I don't just mean with your Bible in front of you and with your small group from church or on a Sunday morning. When I say discipled, I mean the original intent of that word, learner. We are learning all the time. We are being formed, shaped, influenced all the time. Whether we're with our friends, scrolling TikTok, we are being shaped all the time. What we intake, who we follow, who we admire, whose voices mean the most to us, shape what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about the world, what we believe about other people. And so my question for you as we get going, for you to just think to yourself, or maybe write down if you're a note taker, who really disciples you? Like, what voices actually guide your life? And I'm not looking for a standard church answer. I'm looking for you to be honest as you think about the biggest influences in your life. Who really leads you? I ask you that because the text we're in today is really a leadership conversation. Jesus is talking with the Pharisees in John chapter 10, who were the religious leaders of that time, about leadership and the kind of leader that he is versus the kind of leader that they are. And all week we've been in the Gospel of John, and John wrote his gospel in the midst of intense suffering in the church, and he wanted his readers to know that Jesus was worth following no matter what, no matter how hard life got. Jesus could be the one that you trust. And in John chapter 10, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees about who his people are influenced by, who leads them, and whose voice they actually follow. Usually when you hear someone teach about John chapter 10, you'll probably hear people spend a lot of time talking about how dumb sheep are. And it's true, like, poor sheep, they are very dumb. And it's true that Jesus compares us to sheep, which, kind of hurts our feelings, Jesus. But I'm not really going to do that tonight. Back in 2005, there was a story of an entire herd of Turkish sheep, almost 1,600 of them, who walked off a cliff together. I know, you guys are like, wow, that was dark. Yeah, because one sheep walked off and they all followed. Okay, it gets darker. Are you guys ready for the darker part? Some of you are like, no, please stop. 400 of them who fell first cushioned the blow, and they died, and the rest survived. And they all went off together. I know, you guys, you're like, she. We are an easily influenced people. And so I say that to you because before we get too judgmental about sheep, let us remember that we all just chanted, it's time to pay the price in here, so let's not judge the sheep friends too much. Tonight I want to talk to you about how Jesus is the shepherd and the door. Because in this passage, Jesus compares himself to both. And you knowing that he is both can change the rest of your life every day, forever. So let's hop in. I know you guys already turned there to John chapter 10, and we're going to start with verses 1 through 10. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he was brought out all on his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger They will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." So what's Jesus talking about here? When most of us think of sheep, we probably think of sheep in little cute green pastures, right? But that's not really what Jesus is talking about. The context here is that he's speaking to the Pharisees, the religious leaders, and they are obsessed with the law. This group of people that took things to a place they were never intended. What you also need to know is that this was a politically charged and intense environment. The scene would have been loaded. See, between the Old Testament and right here were 400 years of silence from God. And during this time in history, Alexander the Great conquered the world, took over where the Jewish community was, both through the military and through culture. He wanted Greek culture to take over everywhere. And so you're like, well, what does that have to do with this? Actually, it has a lot to do with it, because that's what the people were expecting of Jesus. They were expecting the same kind of perceived power, where someone would come and take over in those ways. And here, Jesus is describing himself as a door and a shepherd. Not really the kind of perceived power they were looking for. Notice in the first verse, he talks about bringing in all the sheep into a sheepfold. Just by a show of hands, anybody here seen a sheepfold in real life? Truth tellers only, yep, a big nobody, maybe one. Yeah, okay, so I haven't either. So let me just show you guys a little picture, all right? You can see there's where the door was and there's where the walls were. And in the ancient Near East, if the sheep were exposed at night, they would be very vulnerable. So shepherds would bring them into sheepfolds or pens to keep them safe. And the primary purpose, as you can see, there is a door that they clearly go in that is open, and walls that things could probably jump over. And the primary purpose of a shepherd was to be the door and lay in the doorway and keep the sheep safe when they got in there. All kinds of intruders would break in. Hostile animals like wolves, even people would come in. And Jesus is trying to establish that he is the kind of leader that would both lay in the door and be the shepherd to protect the sheep so that they could flourish. Notice also Jesus mentions the constant presence of a thief and a robber. And look at what this thief's goal is in verse 10, to steal, kill, and destroy. He also says everyone who comes before him is a liar and a thief. You can see why Jesus was so controversial and ends up being crucified. Because what do thieves do? They cross legitimate boundaries set up for protection, to guard and protect with the intent to steal, kill, and destroy. And maybe some of you are like, well, yeah, but what does that have to do with me? Like, what does that have to do with me right now where I'm at? I'm not a sheep. I've never been in a sheepfold, never even seen one before just now. Actually, I think it has a lot to do with us. See, I think there are two primary ways that the enemy in our lives jumps over the wall to steal, kill, and destroy, and they might not be what you think. The first is self-righteousness, and this is what Jesus is talking to them about. Self-righteousness or religion. Remember here, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and they saw themselves as the gold standard. They were the best. They didn't need anything or anyone because they had it all. They loved to wear fancy clothes to show how amazing they were. And self-righteous at its root is thinking, I am good on my own, I am better than everyone else, and I don't need anyone but myself. And some of us know what that looks like, right? Because maybe even if that's not you, you've known someone like that and being in their presence just makes you feel uncomfortable because you know they think that you're better than you. And Jesus is telling them, you are stealing, you are killing, you are destroying people. See, if you have been shamed in any way by the church and you think that Jesus isn't angry about it, he is more angry than you. And Jesus here is telling them, do not kill my people. The second is rebellion or sin. I know some of us might even be uncomfortable with that word, so let me just break down the way that the Bible explains it. In James 1, verses 13 through 15, he describes rebellion as someone who is tempted, and that temptation leads to desire, and that desire leads to sin, and that sin will lead to death. Spiritual death, emotional death, relational death, but it doesn't go from here to here. It usually is a slow process of temptation to desire, to sin, and then to death. And you don't usually know you're headed for one until you wake up and see that you're there. Did anybody see the documentary on the Fire Festival a few years ago? Anybody? Yeah, I know, what a dumpster fire, right? So there was this documentary about this music festival a few years ago, back in 2017. Yep, here we are. So over on the left here, I had to think for a second. Over on the left is what this fire festival, this music festival that was marketed toward young people, was marketed to be. This incredible week away with the most amazing artists, celebrities, gourmet food, amazing accommodations on this exclusive island in the Bahamas. And people, it was like, it's gonna be the best week of your life. People paid thousands and thousands of dollars just for the tickets. They had to get airplanes there. They were told they were gonna be like especially escorted onto this island, and they show up to what's on the right. Talk about your all-time backfire. You know, it's like, that did not work, right? Okay, so they show up to this. And the people are like, what in the world? I bought tickets to something else. This is where they slept in. These poor people, you guys see them with their suitcases, they're so confused. They're like, where am I? They also thought the whole time they were gonna get gourmet food, like the best food they'd ever have in their lives. I'm gonna show you a picture of what they got for food. You guys ready? Look at that. Wow, not great, right? Like weird bread, weird cheese, weird food. What you need to know, if you guys are like, I'm so sad for these people, or maybe you're making fun of these people, I don't know. The guy who did this, his name was Billy. He's now in prison for 6 years for theft and fraud. But before we get all high and mighty and laugh at these people, as I'm watching this documentary, I'm like, these people, what were they thinking? And then I'm like, oh my word, this is how sin works all the time. This slow burn of we're tempted and we're led to desire. And we don't know that we're in death until we look around and we've got loneliness, broken relationships. Because the thief lied and told us it'd be awesome. We bought the tickets, we show up, and we find ourselves surrounded by loneliness, broken relationships, and we realize that we've bought tickets to the illusion that life can be incredible and abundant apart from God. And it's not true. But Jesus offers us a way to the abundant life, which is himself. In Jesus' description of himself as the door and the shepherd, he shares 3 things that will happen when he becomes both of these things in our lives. First, in verse 3, we see that we will listen to his voice and we will know that voice. Shepherds have an incredible relationship with their sheep. There was a story in the 1980s of officers in charge of a village in Palestine who confiscated all of the sheep in town. And this woman comes to the officer in charge, and she's a widow, and the sheep were her entire livelihood, and she is begging him, like, please, I need my sheep back. I will not survive without my sheep. And he turns around and he's looking at these thousands of sheep, and he's like, what do you want me to do? Like, these have all been taken. I don't know whose is whose. They're not marked. I don't know whose is yours. She's like, please, I know that they'll know me. And so he's like, all right, deal. If you can get them out of here they can be yours. So she calls her son over. This is a true story. And he brings his little flute, and he plays his little flute sheep song, and the sheep are just like, bah, that's our song. That's our song. And they all follow her out. They follow her out, her and her son. Because they had been known and they knew the sound of the voice. In a sea of sheep, they were able to know and be known. See, we all have voices in our heads that are trying to get to us, that are so loud. And some of you are on paths right now that you hate, but you think you have no choice. Because you've already started down that path, so you've got to keep going down that path. Some of you right now are in relationships with people that you know are not good for you. And you know the voice that is telling you, I love you, you do not need to be in this. But you've believed the lie that says that you are unlovable. And so the first person that came along that liked you just a little bit, you latched onto. And Jesus is like, no. Come back to me. Some of you have believed the lie that your life will be worth nothing if you are not successful, famous, and rich. And so you have put every ounce of energy into making sure that you can be the very best, most successful person you know. And Jesus is telling you, my identity is all you need. I can show you a different way to live. The second thing that happens when Jesus becomes our door and shepherd, again in verse 3, is he knows us by name and leads us. Jesus says he'll know his sheep, call them by name, lead them out, and they will follow. God calling us by name shows us the power and intimacy of his relationship with us. He knows what we need and what we want. As a matter of fact, if you look back in John chapter 1 and verse 38, the first words that Jesus speaks in verse 38 are, what do you want? What do you want? I know Brad talked about that last night. What do you really want? In Psalm 23, when David describes the Lord as our shepherd, he says, I shall not want. See, to the degree that you and I find ourselves longing and longing and longing and wanting more and more and more are the same places that we are not letting God tend to our souls. Because in our humanity, we will grab for everything that feels like it's going to satisfy. And we don't know we're empty until we wake up and realize we have bought into the lie of an illusion of a life apart from God. But he knows. He knows your individual longings. He knows what you really want. He knows who you really are. And he says, I can fulfill every desire you have in myself. So where does he lead us? There's another phrase that David uses in Psalm 23 that I think speaks to the care of the shepherd of the sheep, which is when he says, you anoint my head with oil. And just to give ourselves a picture, I want to show you guys a really precious picture of sheep. Are you guys ready? Yep. Look at that little sheep. Oh, I know. So what I'm about to tell you is going to break your heart. You guys are like, come on. No, but listen. Hold on. So the shepherd would anoint the sheep's head with oil. Because in the summertime, there would be these things called nasal flies. And these little tiny flies would buzz around the heads of the sheep, and they would go in through the ear canal. And without oil, the flies would land on the mucus part, get into their ears, and the larvae would turn into these worm-like things. I know some of you are just like, stop, please stop. And these worms would make their way up into the passages through the ear canals onto their brains and burrow and make a home. And they would drive the sheep so crazy that they could not even think about anything else. And some of them would bang their heads against trees and sometimes die because they were going so insane. And so the shepherds would anoint their heads with oil because even if they had just begun to make their way in there, no matter where the bugs were, when the oil came, it stopped. And it would change the entire makeup of the sheep. And isn't that just like the enemy? In Scripture, The enemy is also called the accuser, the father of lies, and these lies come into our ears and make a home in our brains, and they drive us crazy. And Jesus is offering us a life where his voice can be louder than those bugs. I think the thing that broke my heart this year as I walked with so many young people and learned from them was that I knew that the enemy had taken up residence in so many of your hearts and minds this year. And he made a home with lies that were not true. Those bugs for us look like bitterness, shame, confusion, rejection, anger, doubt, guilt, insecurity, jealousy, impure thoughts, gossip. And they go in and they become a frustration, and you can't think about anything else. And some of you in this room know exactly what I'm talking about, where it drives you so crazy you feel like you'll do anything for it to stop. And God says, I am your shepherd. Let me protect you. Come home to me. I will lead you out to the abundant life, but you have to follow me. A few months ago, I got really wounded in a relationship, and isn't that just the nature of relationships, especially in 2020, right? Relationships were hard this year. And for the first few days, I vented about this person to my husband, and I do that thing that sometimes us sinful people do. Some of you who've never sinned are like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but some of you know what I'm talking about. Where someone hurts you and you like puff up a little bit inside, and you're like, oh yeah, you want to hurt me? Okay, I've seen every bad thing you've done. I'm gonna recount that, right? Some of you know, you're like, no, I don't know. Yes, you do. And I did that thing where I made this person smaller in my mind to make myself feel less wounded, and I vented about this person to my husband. But you know, the thing is that after those few days of puffing myself up and making this person smaller and taking away her God-given dignity, to be honest, in the way that I talked about her, I didn't feel any better. In fact, I felt anxious in her presence. I felt angry. I felt bitter. And I wasn't even approaching God, asking him, what do you think about this? Because to be honest, I don't think I wanted to. So check this out. In some places, shepherds would make dips and make the sheep go through this dip so that they would be completely immersed in oil. And the reason was so that even when they would butt heads and lock horns, they would slip right off of each other. So that when they tried to harm each other, they couldn't even do that because the oil was too powerful for them to hurt one another. See, as we bring every single problem, even relationship problems, friendship problems, family problems to Jesus, he changes us. He changes how we see. He changes what we think. He changes our minds. And when I did that, he finally changed that this is a person that he died for too, and no matter what I felt, it did not change that this was a person with the image of God in their lives, and I was sinning by the way I thought about them. And I felt free. Did I like that at first? No. But it reminds me of the quote by Anne Lamott where it says, you can surely know you've made God in your own image when you think he hates all the same people you do. God's like, let me show you who that person really is. See, as we walk with him, the Holy Spirit changes us from the inside out, even down to our relationships. And so the third thing I want you to see about Jesus as the shepherd in John chapter 10 is this. He laid down his life so that we could have it to the full. Jesus keeps going in verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And I have other sheep that are not of this fold, and he's talking about you and me. I must bring them also, for they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. And for this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I've received from my Father. See, here as Jesus is describing himself as the good shepherd, he contrasts himself with the hired hands. And some of you are like, what on earth are the hired hands? You probably know what the hired hands are. You know that job that you have that you don't really care about, but you're just there to make some money? Or the sport that you're playing that you don't really care about, but it looks kind of good on a college application, or a club you're a part of. You don't care about the cause, but you know it's going to look impressive, right? Some of you guys know. Or maybe you've had a coach like this, or a teacher like this, or a leader like this, where in some way you knew, I don't think they really care about me. I think I am just a stepping stool for them to get what they want. And so if I'm in trouble, that doesn't really bother them because they're there for themselves, right? That's what the hired hands are. But what this led to was that when the sheep were in any kind of danger, the shepherd who would have protected his sheep, the hired hand runs away from them. Or even worse, will throw one over the wall to sacrifice that so that he doesn't get hurt. Do any of you watch National Geographic? Any big National Geographic fans in the room? Yeah, I know, I get it. So the thing is that my son is super into animals of all kinds, and so I really tried. I gave it my all on National Geographic, and it's nothing against them. They're an amazing, whatever. But the thing about some of those episodes, especially with, really anywhere, land, sea, sky, doesn't matter, somebody's always going to die, right? Like somebody's dying, no matter what place you're in. Even like if they did National Geographic city suburbs, I think even then they would do like animal deaths, like, and now the squirrel is coming to kill the ant, like it doesn't matter, somebody is dying. And my son will just watch it and just be like, whatevs, and I just cannot handle it. It's just too sad, because it's always the most pitiful animal that dies, You're like, save him, give him a home, and then the lion just devours him. I know, sad. But just like the hired hand, this is what self-righteousness and rebellion will do. Self-righteousness will sacrifice you to preserve itself, because the moment that you stop measuring up, whether that's in your own mind or in the community that you're a part of, if you stop measuring up in its self-righteousness, you'll be cut off. You're not good enough. This is what rebellion and sin will do. It will lure you with the illusion that you can be satisfied and leave you alone and empty and broken when you realize you've bought the lie. The hired hands here represent that those who care about themselves more than they care about the sheep are nothing like Jesus. Jesus is nothing like that. Because notice in these verses 5 times Jesus says, I lay down my life. See, when sin was coming to hunt you down, when hell was coming to hunt you down, Jesus threw himself between you and your enemies, and he was devoured that you may escape and that you may live and live abundantly. And that's why he says, I am the good shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep. I am the door. I will protect them so that no one can come in and harm them, and I am the shepherd that will lead them in and out. And Jesus says, let me willingly give up my life so that you don't face death and eternal hell, and he's different than any other way. He's not going to use his power to destroy people or use people up and spit them out. He loves us so much, he died for us. See, just a few chapters later in John chapter 19, we see Jesus' crucifixion, and I think the danger for those of us who maybe have grown up in church is that we've heard this story so many times, it doesn't matter to us. Or we think, even worse, Jesus died for everyone, but I'm not sure if he died for me. So I just want to recount the details, not to be like gruesome, but to remind us of the sacrifice that he's really talking about here. What it means when he says, I laid down my life. in John chapter 19, we see Jesus' crucifixion. We see the crown of thorns, a robe, and the king of the Jews claim above his head in verse 5, which would have been a slap in the face as a way to mock this utterly unking like Jesus. We see the flogging in verse 14, where Roman soldiers strapped their victims and beat them with weapons that had little thin strips of leather. And at the end of those would be a knot, a bone, a stone, or glass. And 40 times they would rake across the back of their victims. We see the walk to the cross in John 19, verse 7, because it wasn't enough for him to be beat and nailed to a cross. They had to walk him through the center of town because they wanted everyone to remember. We see the humiliating game for his clothes in verse 23, because it wasn't enough that he was walked through the center of town, but it was common practice for the soldiers to throw dice for victims' clothes, make a game of their death. In verse 25, we see that there's a circle of onlookers that included Jesus' mother, Mary, his aunt, a family friend, and Mary Magdalene. And Luke's account tells us all who knew him stood by to watch. See, I think what we miss is that the same people who saw him wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger, are now watching him hang on a cross. And Jesus had been truly with them. He laughed with them, he cried with them, he drove out demons, he healed the sick, he shared meals with them. And in verses 28 through 30, Jesus says, "It is finished." And after 6 hours of pushing against death, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. He laid down his life. The line in Greek basically says he let go of his life. Because nobody killed him. God chose that. See, he is the good shepherd who gave up his life. He chose to suffer for the sin of you and me and the rest of the world. Because the God who could have done anything, the God of all power, was the kind of God to wrap a towel around his waist and wash the feet of his disciples, even those he knew were going to betray him. The God of all power who could have done anything compared himself to a shepherd who knows his sheep, who knows their pain, their cries, and their names. He's the God of the entire universe, who knows you and meets you exactly where you are tonight. Not where you hoped you'd be at Move 2021, where you really are. And he says, "I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. I know. I know. I know. I know your story. I know your name. I know everything you've endured this year, and I laid down my life, not just so that you could be free for eternity, but so that you could be free now." So I want to just ask you tonight 2 questions, really. The first is, have you entered through the door? Jesus promises that whoever enters through the door will be saved. And who else is there like Jesus in all of human history, who lays at the door? Who else is there like Jesus who can tend to our relationships and our deepest wounds, our weary souls? Who can be our closest friend when every other person lets us down? Jesus. He is the door. He knows you by name. He knows your temptations, what you really want. He knows what you face, and he asks you to trust him, to let him come between you and the enemy who is only there to destroy you. The blood of Jesus breaks the chain of sin and separation from God, and he sees you and says, "Let me lead you. Let me protect you. You don't have to stand at the door for yourself anymore. Let me do that. Let me tend to your wounded soul. I want to be the oil in your life so that when the enemy comes and tries to take you out, all you have to do is come back to me." And the second thing I just want to ask tonight is he your shepherd? Some of you have entered through the door, and you've said, Jesus is who I'm following, but if you were really honest this year, he has not been the primary voice that guides your life. He has not been the one that you have let tend to your empty places. At the very beginning, I asked you, who is discipling you? Who leads you really? What voices have the most influence over your life? So let me just ask you, what do you really want? What do you need? Because right here is where the Good Shepherd is found, where Jesus says, come home. Come back to me. So do you need more joy? Do you need more peace? Do you need more freedom? Jesus came 2,000 years ago not just to save you so that you could go to heaven, but so that you could experience the abundant and free life right now with him on this side of eternity. And he just says, I know. I love you. Let me lead you. Let me be your shepherd. I want to close tonight by reading what the Psalms write about the Lord as our shepherd, and I know the danger of this is that just like the crucifixion, the danger of reading something so familiar is that some of us just don't care. Or we've tuned it out over the years, or we've thought, I've heard this 1,000 times. But when you get in that space, that is a warning that you are tempted to believe that this doesn't matter for you. When your heart is in a place that is so numb, it is a warning that you're not letting God tend to your wounded soul or to the places that he wants to refresh and renew. And so no matter what you need to just hear this tonight, whether you want to close your eyes or just listen or read along on the screen or read with your own Bible, I want to read Psalm 23 for us. And to just have you receive this and remember, or maybe for the first time, that the Lord wants to be your leader, your shepherd. So let me read this for you. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He takes me to lush pastures. He leads me to refreshing water. He restores my strength. He leads me down the right paths for the sake of his reputation. Even when I must walk through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff reassure me. You prepare a feast before me in plain sight of my enemies. You refresh my head with oil. My cup is completely full. And surely, God, your goodness and faithfulness will pursue me all my days, and I will live in the Lord's house for the rest of my life. Jesus, you are the kind of shepherd who leaves the 99 to find the one. You come and find us, God. And in your name, I pray that the voice of the enemy who has taken up residence in so many of our minds and hearts this year would be silenced, and that your voice would be the loudest thing we hear. That your truth, that we are loved, that we are known, that we are seen, that we are forgiven, is louder than the voice of shame. That we would know that you took on death, you took on our sins so that we may find life and find it to the full. And God, may we walk through the door believing that you are the way that we want to follow the rest of our lives. That you, Jesus, can satisfy every empty place, and that you are a trustworthy leader that we can follow with full confidence every day. We love you. It's in your name. Amen.